Since 1896, the Lake Superior and Ishpeming Railroad has served the vital role of shuttling iron ore from the Marquette Iron Range down to the dock for further transport via the Great Lakes. Created and still owned and operated by iron mining giant Cleveland-Cliffs, the railroad was created primarily to streamline shipment around the existing railroads whose rates were too high and service too unreliable in the opinion of mining managers. Now working their 123rd season, the railroad, whose original main line was built in just 8 months, continues to use both the existing route and new territory to serve the Tilden Mine, Michigan's last operating iron ore exploit. Long revered for its beautiful scenery and battle-worn general electric horsepower, the LS&I of today still resembles that of days gone by, as they continue to operate some of the last U30C and C30-7 locomotives in the country, shuttling ore cars which date back to before World War II. In this special presentation of the Thornapple River Rail Series, we'll take a look at the modern LS&I with its heavy haul attitude in a small homegrown package which ships over 8 million long tons of iron ore annually. So come along for a trip to Michigan's Upper Peninsula as we document the Lake Superior and Ishpeming of the 21st century, Michigan's Iron Ore Road. Quickly before we get started, I'd like to make a shout out to David Schauer and his LS&I in Color books published by Morning Sun. These are treasures, and I personally recommend them for anybody with an interest in the railroad. This work is indebted to it, and I'll make sure to leave links where you can pick up a copy of your own down in the video description. At Presque Isle, the location of LS&I's 1,200-foot-long ore dock, it's just another day for the dock team as they run the chutes to load another Great Lakes freighter. With the exception of the pneumatic pocket gates, little has changed in this scene since the dock was built in 1912. The premise is simple: drop the ore from the cars into the dock, and then drop the ore from the dock into the ships of the Great Lakes, using gravity to move the heavy ore. But as simple as this process is, the ore is not mined right here. Rather, the iron is buried underground in the hills above the lake near the towns of Negaunee and Ishpeming. That's why the railroad is here, to shuttle the ore from the mines down to the lake.
12 operator for radio check, over. Good radio. Good radio.
Just inland, West Yard is the facility where cars are staged before and after their trip up to the dock, and thus also serves as the base of operations for the dock jobs. As we'll see, the LS&I operates much like a relay race with 3 distinct circuits of activity. The first and last legs of this circuit are held by the dock crews, finishing the race by dumping the loads and then beginning it anew by assembling empty trains for the mine. West Yard is, despite its name, the eastern terminus of the LS&I. Clearly, it made more sense when the railroad had several yards in Marquette and extended all the way east through to Munising and beyond to tap timber reserves, but those lines have long been abandoned and the railroad has shifted to an ore-only posture. In any event, on this late fall afternoon, a hill job has been prepared for departure, ready to bring 121 empty ore jennies back up the grade to the railroad's contemporary base of operations at Eagle Mills. With a pair of leased AC 44 CWs for power, the engineer will have no problem getting the 3,000-ton train up the hill, despite the railroad gaining 680 feet of elevation in only 10 miles of track.
They're on a roll, bye.
As the last car passes by the carman, he radios in a good roll-by inspection to inform the crew that he has seen no issues on the train, such as forgotten handbrakes or dragging equipment. County Road 550 is the first public crossing encountered on the ascent and marks the end of yard limit rules as they enter track warrant territory according to dispatcher authority. Further up the powerline corridor, we take in this view as the grade picks up to 1.6%. Here it is worth noting that the Presque Isle power plant seen off in the distance, and these power lines were built by Cleveland Cliffs in the 1970s to supply electricity for the power-hungry ore refining and pelletizing process at the Empire and Tilden mines. The area around Three Lakes and Forestville is crisscrossed by numerous hiking trails, affording a multitude of views of the railroad in the natural environment, which will in turn be heavily contrasted by the large open-pit mines up in the Iron Range. At Forestville Road, one of the old intermediate signals from the days of CTC signaling on the hill lingers on despite being out of service for over a decade, deactivated as an unnecessary cost on a railroad where almost never is there more than one job assigned to run the hill at any given time, making track warrants a much more efficient operation for rail traffic control. As the train approaches the Dead River Bridge, the terrain becomes more unforgiving, and it's becoming apparent just how impressive it was that the railroad was constructed all the way through to Ishpeming in just 8 months. The terrain yields few shortcuts and throws in a lot of rocky outcroppings that the builders had to blast through. The Dead River empties into Lake Superior just a stone's throw from the Ordock and provides a relatively easy ascent from the lake for the railroad, especially in comparison with the 2.5% competing grade constructed further to the south by the Duluth, South Shore, and Atlantic. But in order to eventually reach the Iron Range, the railroad has to cross the river, by which time it is deep in this ravine with some 130 feet from the water to where the rails need to be. The original construction included a hodgepodge timber and steel structure for this purpose, but within 20 years it was undersized for the heavier and more powerful Baldwin 280 consolidations on order and due for delivery in 1916. By that point, the railroad was surely anticipating heavier ore cars as well. Built by the Wisconsin Bridge and Iron Company, the then new structure was wholly constructed of steel with concrete footings, but is just as much of a mashup as the previous structure. As this diagram published in the Engineering News Record shows, there are 11 spans with 8 different designs, including 5 spans built with reused material from the original bridge. The unique arch design was constructed to eliminate the need for false work in this craggy ravine and supports just over half the bridge at 4 points in competent bedrock. The arch then supports 4 steel tower piers, forming a bridge on top of a bridge reminiscent of Roman aqueducts. From a rock outcrop on the south side of the stream, it's hard to do anything but marvel at the bridge's ingenious design and appreciate how the engineers built it in such a hard-to-reach place. Now over 100 years old, it's still serving its original owner and has flown hundreds of millions of tons of iron ore over the Dead River. Compared with the Dead River Bridge, the structure over US Highway 41 is small and of standard design, except for the side panels installed to keep ore from falling onto the highway. It was constructed in 1956 for the then new highway alignment, making it by far the youngest of the 4 major LS&I bridges. One of the old intermediate signals here is still in service as a fixed approach to the control point at Eagle Mills East, and a defect detector is also on site to catch dragging equipment or overheated wheel bearings. Just beyond the highway, a steel through-plate girder bridge provides a flyover of the original Duluth, South Shore, and Atlantic right-of-way, the railroad the LS&I was built to replace, and which by 1971 was out of the Marquette Range iron ore business entirely. Looking back down US 41, we can see all the way to Lake Superior, which the railroad is now over 650 feet above. We can see the smokestacks of the Presque Isle power plant, but the ore dock is just out of view. After passing over the scale at Pine Hill, empties make their last pull for Eagle Mills, passing over the Morgan Creek Bridge.
Approaching Eagle.
Signal indication, you have permission to enter Eagle Mills East. Landing on track number 3, over.
Signal indication, 3 has permission into Eagle East, land on 3.
That is correct, operator out.
About the time they cross Morgan Creek, the crew calls in for permission into the yard. The railroad's dispatcher, known as the control operator, quickly codes them a signal into the yard, assuming of course that there isn't anything else in the way. As trains enter the yard, it is quite common for them to pause momentarily while the conductor alights from the engine. From there, they line any switches needed to get them headed for the right track, and then climb into the company pickup truck, which is provided to expedite switching and air tests, while eliminating the need to ride any rail cars. From the air, we can see this hill run threading into Track Alpha, one of 5 full-length tracks on the south side of the complex, each capable of holding an entire ore train. Off to the right is the car and locomotive shop, built new in the 1970s when the railroad's original facilities at Presque Isle were torn down to make way for the power plant. 3 indoor tracks were provided for locomotives and 2 for railcar repair. Eagle Mills is the contemporary base of operations on the LS&I and the midpoint of the iron ore relay. It is here that the hill trains usually exchange traffic with the Tilden Mine jobs, which in turn complete the circuit to the mine. Going into further detail, the LS&I has 5 common job assignments in this 3-segment relay race. The first are the dock jobs, which as previously discussed customarily remain down in Marquette. Occasionally though, these may be converted into dock hill jobs, which then make a turn up to Eagle Mills to exchange empties for loads, in addition to the routine dock shifting duties. However, most trains run on the hill are simply given the name Hill and typically make 2 round trips per shift between Eagle Mills and West Yard. However, if only 1 turn to Marquette is necessary on the shift, the railroad may instead run a yard hill crew, which will then complete 1 turn each to the Tilden Mine and Marquette. Which way they will head first depends on the circumstances, as does whether or not they take empties with them to the mine. Finally, the Tilden jobs work exclusively between Eagle Mills and the Tilden Mine, usually completing 2 round trips per shift. As we'll see, the 121 car trains are split into 2 for return from the mine, and thus one of the runs to the mine will typically be just light power. The final key to LS&I train nomenclature is the number 3, 7, or 11, noted before the job title. This is due to the railroad's long-standing shift scheduling system, with trains beginning at 7 a.m., 3 p.m., and 11 p.m., and lasting for only 8 hours, contrary to traditional railroad practice of calling crews as they are needed. So with the Tilden job now in command of the empties, we head over to the other end of the yard, where they immediately cross State Highway 35 upon departure. It's well known that the LS&I is one of the last railroads in the country to operate GE U30Cs and C30-7s, which were built in the 1970s. Like most mining enterprises, Cleveland Cliffs keeps a tight lid on investments in what is a highly cyclical and capital-intensive industry. Thus, like the ore cars, they squeeze every last drop out of their equipment, including motive power. Due to their lack of extended range dynamic brakes, the old green machines are generally run on hill jobs only as a last resort, keeping them captive to Tilden Mine trains. Thus we'll see the old battle-beaten boats and Dash 7s only on this side of the railroad. County Highway 480 is the only bridge flying over the LS&I, giving rail fans a great look down the railroad, such as the case here where the U30Cs lead the way. Mills Junction is one of the most iconic spots on the railroad, with trains taking the 10-degree turn through the mainline's largest rock cut, while also entering the CTC territory, which covers the next mile of railroad and 3 junctions with the Canadian National: Eagle Mills, Palmer Line, and Empire Junctions. Eagle Mills Junction is a relatively new addition to the railroad, created in 1952 when the creation of the Tilden Mine necessitated the realignment of the C&W and DSS&A trackage in the area, leading them to construct a joint line, shown in green, which crossed the original 1896 LS&I mainline, shown in white. The LS&I was also granted access to the new mine, so a connection, shown in blue, was built. Little did they know it would ultimately become the mainline. This transition occurred over time, as the mines served by the original route were closed one by one, leaving only Tilden and Empire open by the mid-1980s. Even then, the remainder of the 1896 mainline west of here was abandoned by the mid-1960s, as mine subsidence in the Negaunee area forced construction of a new joint mainline further to the north. The new line consolidated the previously separate DSS&A, C&W, and LS&I lines to the area, where the LS&I has not been west of Negaunee since the 1990s. With the first flurries of the season falling in mid-October, the Dash 7s exit the cut on their way to the mine as a 3 Tilden job. For their part, the CN also has some eclectic General Electrics on their roster, including the railfan favorite C40-8Ms with the full cowl car body. Leading the Ishpeming to Partridge turn known as the L540, the 2410 is still in the old zebra stripe paint scheme, as it leads a sizable train around the CN side of the junction, easily told apart by the lack of spilled iron ore. Buffalo Road marks the summit of the grade, which descends 1.12% for the next mile to Empire Junction. On this map of the area, the modern LS&I trackage is marked in blue, the CN is in red, and their joint mainline is in purple. The old Y leading to the Tracy mine is easily picked out, as are some of its still standing structures. An underground exploit operated by Jones and Laughlin, it was the last ore customer of DSS&A's successor, Soo Line, in the region, and thus the closure of the mine in 1971 also signaled the end of their involvement in the Marquette Range iron ore trade. Today, between Canadian National and the LS&I, this segment remains by far the busiest piece of railroad in the Upper Peninsula. Particularly busy days can reach 24 moves in a single 24-hour period, though historically it wasn't unheard of to see double that number. It makes perfect sense then why this segment received and retains its CTC signals, speeding movements along with dispatcher-controlled switches. While the LS&I focuses its energy on the movement of iron ore, it also supplies the mines with raw materials for the pellet making process, which arrive via interchange with the CN. Bentonite clay, which acts as a binder to keep the pellets from falling apart, comes as a powder in the covered hoppers. Additionally, sodium hydroxide arrives in the tank cars and is used in the flotation process to liberate the non-magnetic hematite ore from the waste rock. Looking down the right-of-way, the signal at Palmerline Junction displays a diverging clear indication, another sign that the CN to Escanaba was the original primary route, not the LS&I. The town of Palmer grew up around the Richmond and New Volunteer mines, served by branches of the C&W and DSS&A, long before the LS&I gained access to the then new Empire Mine in 1962. The branch we see today is a hodgepodge of realignments, starting out as a branch of the DSS&A heading south out of Negaunee, which was later realigned to run via Palmerline Junction as part of the 1952 Joint Line project, and then ultimately shifted around several more times to make way for expanding mining operations at the Empire Mine. At any rate, the rails down to Empire are a continuation of joint territory with the CN, whose mainline Escanaba joins at the Y formed by Partridge, Palmerline, and Empire Junctions. However, the CN's ownership and service rights extend only to the Empire Mine. Therefore, since the mine was mothballed in 2016, the CN has not operated past Empire Junction except to turn equipment on the Y. As Yoopers know all too well, mid-October means the chance of snowfall has returned after a brief 4-month hiatus. Coming around the curve between Palmer Line and Empire Junctions, this 7 Tilden is nicely accented by the first snow of the season, while the fall color change is still in full swing. The CN connection between Partridge and Empire Junctions once hosted almost as much tonnage as the LS&I, but has largely been silent since the idling of the Empire Mine. For now, signals still guard the switch here, acting as the southern limit of the CTC district to Eagle Mills Junction. The nearby pond, which is actually a flooded mine pit, offers nice reflections on calm days, with nature juxtaposed by the colossal, man-made palisades behind. These are the Empire Mine's overburden dumps, formed of the waste rock removed to gain access to the valuable iron ore buried deep below. Thus, these mounds represent one of the more dramatic environmental costs of open-pit mining. A final look now from the air as we follow a train under the command of the C30-7s through Empire Junction and into the artificial canyon. As previously mentioned, the Empire Mine was not the first mining operation in the immediate area, and in fact was built directly on the site of the new volunteer mine. Opened in 1962 by a consortium of steelmakers in partnership with Cleveland Cliffs, the mine would become one of the largest and deepest in the United States, from which they extracted a low-grade ore with around 30% iron content by weight. Compared with previous mining endeavors, which produced ore rich enough to ship directly to the steel mills, Empire had to concentrate and pelletize its ore, a process which results in roughly doubling the ore's iron content by weight to around 65% in the final product. Once capable of producing just over 8 million long tons of iron ore pellets annually, today the mine sits silently, a giant of industry frozen in time. All mining operations literally mine themselves towards death, as every ton removed represents one less ton available for future exploitation. Ore also gets more expensive to remove with increasing depth, an economic fate which fell hard upon the mine in 2016. Cliffs has spoken publicly about potentially reopening the mine in order to exploit new ground to provide ore for the company's new hot-briquetted iron plant being built in Toledo, Ohio. However, as of late 2019, the company had yet to make a final decision on where to source the ore, in part due to overall weak demand for new steel. The westernmost point on the railroad visible to the public without taking to the air is one of the access roads to the Empire Mine. These days, Cleveland Cliffs keeps an understandably tight lid on access to the mining areas, and it is definitely best to keep a respectful distance. The Tilden Mine is about a decade younger than Empire and still has significant mine life remaining. Cliffs forecasts around 130 million tons of iron ore remains to be extracted and produced given today's economic outlook. Currently, they produce all of their rated capacity of around 8 million long tons of refined ore annually. About 1.2 million tons moves via the CN on an all-rail route to Sault Ste. Marie, while the remainder is hauled back down to the dock at Marquette. Thanks to the advent of aerial drone photography, it is possible to sneak a look at the mine itself without taking an airplane ride. As seen from the south, the facilities are every bit as impressive as at Empire, although perhaps more compact than the older plant next door. For the loading process, the 121-car empty trains are split in half, with each cut set out for loading by one of three methods. The first method is to load directly from the stockpile, which is accomplished by large wheel loaders capable of filling each car with just a handful of scoops from the pile. The other two methods involve the triple track loadout pocket. On the AC 4400s, the engineer can use the pace setter controls to slowly crawl the train under the tipple, while the mine operators flood load each car as it passes. However, the preferred method is to gravity drop the cars without any locomotives at all. The tracks under the pocket have a downhill grade towards the east, so the loadout crew ties in ground air to the empty cut of cars. The load technicians can then, by controlling the air brakes, let gravity pull the cars slowly under the pocket for loading. This frees up the train crew's time, allowing them to move more ore per shift, and by extension cycle the limited ore car fleet faster than if they had to partake in the loading process. The last step for trains departing the mine is to pass under a water deluge rack in place to reduce dust, especially at the dock. However, it is not used when freezing temperatures are expected to avoid ore freezing inside of the cars. As the loads roll north past Empire, they encounter a pair of mainline turnouts handled by the control operator at Tilden Junction and Empire Mine siding. These powered turnouts went in during the last track shift in the 1990s and are protected by signals but are not operated as part of CTC. Rather, the signals only display stop or restricting depending on the condition of the turnouts ahead. Having these turnouts powered helped keep things fluid back when the Empire Mine was still shipping. It was not at all unheard of for there to be more than 24 moves per day between Empire and Empire Junction, with the CNW and its successors running 2 or more trains a day down to Escanaba. Before the dewatering pumps were shut off with the close of mining in 2016, the Empire pit plunged from the railroad down 1,500 feet to just 300 feet above sea level, making the pit the lowest point in the state of Michigan. Interestingly, the highest point in the state is also the result of mining in the Marquette Range, as the Tilden Mine's primary overburden pile now rises to more than 2,000 feet above sea level, just beating out the 1,979-foot mark of Mount Arvon in the Huron Mountains. After passing the east end of the Empire siding, they passed through the first of 2 culvert-style tunnels installed to reduce the need for the massive mine haul trucks to cross the railroad at grade. The original alignment between Palmer and Empire Junction featured a 2.25% descent, which thankfully was lowered to just 1.5% during one of the track shifts for the mine. However, the area around Empire Junction still requires careful train handling, as the 1.5% quickly becomes a 1.1% uphill climb for trains headed to Eagle Mills. This hogback is the primary reason that loads are still run with only 60 cars at a time. While the U30Cs and C30-7s have been in heavy haul service for their entire careers, they continue to be relatively reliable war horses for the railroad thanks to the tender loving care of the mechanical department. However, sometimes they can still cause trouble, as in this case where the 3073 dropped its load at the worst possible time just as they were approaching Mills Junction. Thankfully, the issue was quickly resolved, as 5,200 tons is nearly the limit of what a pair of these old machines can handle on this part of the railroad. By the time the head end passes the signal for Eagle Mills Junction, the grade has subsided and the train will soon settle in for the relatively flat remainder of the run to Eagle Mills. While the CN's handful of weekly trains on the line to Ishpeming is insignificant compared to the LS&I's iron ore conveyor belt, meets can still happen if the timing works out just right. Here the CN L549 holds short for a loaded run of the 7 Tilden to clear up, before continuing down towards Partridge and ultimately Escanaba. At the dead end of Old County Highway 480 at last light, we found a 3 Tilden cruising the last mile to Eagle Mills. Next in line just 5 minutes later was the CNU 745 with 45 empty hoppers for loading at the Tilden Mine, work completed daily by the 7-weigher. With permission to enter the yard secured over the radio from the control operator, inbound loaded trains proceed over Highway 35 into Eagle Mills West. Beyond the highway, a trestle carries trains over the Carp River. The siding here is used to handle ore cars which have been loaded with reclaimed ore collected from the track by the pellet picking machine. They're dumped at the cleanout trestle here, after which the ore is screened to remove any ballast or other debris. It is then stockpiled for sale as a low-grade product known as chips or fines, which also includes pellets rejected at the mine. Looking east, the crew is lined into Track Alpha, where they'll drop this cut of loads, leaving them at the west end. That way, the next Tilden Mine run can simply double their train over and couple the strings together without the need to shove the first cut around. Visible off to the right is what remains of the Pioneer Pellet Plant, while the reclaimed ore processing area is in the lower left, and the railroad's main office and control operator are located in the small building just beyond. On another day, the U30Cs arrived at Eagle Mills with a cut of ore with instructions to fill out Track Alpha. After running down Track 3 to the east end of the yard, they snaked their way down the yard ladder and into the pellet plant spur, which is left in place just for this purpose so trains don't have to follow the county highway crossing on the main line while making their double. The ground shakes quite a bit here as the heavy cars hit the well-worn joints, but soon enough the rear end has cleared the switch to Alpha, which is promptly thrown by the conductor, and they begin the reverse move to finish out the double.
In between.
After the joint has been made and the conductor laces up the air, the engineer takes the power ahead back onto the pellet plant spur. Since they completed 2 mine runs, it is time for them to mark off and let the incoming 3 o'clock shift take over. The control operator soon has them lined back towards the barn, as the U30Cs are not needed on the afternoon shift.
Okay.
At times when no hill trains are scheduled, Maintenance of Way often takes the opportunity to address the ongoing issue of ore pellets which fall from the cars and collect on the track. Rather elusive to find and film, the pellet picker is seen here entering Eagle Mills with a full load of reclaim ore headed for the cleanout trestle. Once loaded trains are fully assembled by the Tilden Mine runs, the hill jobs take back over for the rest of the run to Marquette. Since the yard dips westward towards the mine, the engineer puts several notches in the throttle to get his 10,000-ton train moving across County Highway 492. Trains departing Eagle Mills quickly roll upon the Pine Hill scale, where the train will be weighed in order to ascertain an accurate tally of ore being moved down to the dock. The scale weighs the train while it is in motion, but only up to 2.5 miles per hour. Signs are posted every 240 feet along the track, representing 1 minute of travel at the prescribed speed. However, the AC 4400s are equipped with pace setter controls, making the job of keeping the speed consistent much easier, another reason why the leased units are preferred on hill trains. A close-up look at the scale shows the short, isolated length of rail which sits directly atop of the scale equipment. It's easy to see why the required speed is what it is, as each axle is only perched atop this segment for a fraction of a second, even at walking speed. With the cars slowly rolling by, it is a good opportunity to discuss some of the fleet's storied history. While the LS&I at times has operated several thousand ore cars, the number today is just under 1,000, and several more are removed from service annually due to major failures or the occasional derailment. The newest cars in the fleet are the 8000 and 8100 series, built new in 1965, with the 8500s just a year older, built in 1964. The remainder of the fleet dates to the late 1930s and early 40s, with an average build date of 1944, making this the oldest revenue car fleet in the country. The ore cars themselves are all about 24 feet in length, including couplers, to line up with the dock pockets. However, longer cars would also be impractical due to the ore's high density. Most of the cars may be 80 years old, but they're still exceptionally heavy even by today's standards, straining the track with a load of nearly 3 tons per foot of train. Thus, the hill trains weigh about the same as a contemporary loaded coal train, but are only about half as long. For another half-mile beyond the scale, the LS&I follows the abandoned DSS&A right-of-way, now traversed by the Iron Ore Heritage Trail. This line was only recently removed by the Wisconsin Central, as the line lacked online customers between Munising and Negaunee, and was no longer needed as a through route after the Wisconsin Central completed the acquisition of the C&W between Escanaba and Partridge. As they reach the quarry, the rear end has cleared the scale, so the engineer applies some throttle to get the train moving in earnest. In a moment, they'll fly over the old DSS&A and US 41 on the back-to-back bridges. As the grade picks up, the engineer will set the brakes with a 5 to 8 pound reduction, which will be maintained all the way to Marquette. Speed is then adjusted as needed by modulating the dynamic brakes on the locomotives. The lack of extended range dynamic braking is thus another reason why the lease units are preferred on the hill, keeping the older GEs quarantined to the shorter hogbacks between Eagle Mills and the Tilden Mine. In short order, the train once again addresses the Dead River Bridge, this time with dynamics and air brakes howling instead of the locomotive prime movers used on the uphill climb. Forestville is always awash in color in the month of October, but is still scenic in any season as we take in a number of views as they progress downhill through the area. As they hit the power line corridor, they're on the home stretch and in communication with West Yard about the yarding plan for their train. The track flattens out here, an area known as the Flats, but the brakes aren't off just yet, with 90 feet of elevation still to lose. In the days before extended range dynamic braking and composite brake shoes, trains would arrive in Marquette shrouded in brake shoe smoke. Thankfully today that is no longer the case, reducing the need to replace brake shoes while increasing safety by keeping more air brake pressure in reserve should it ever be needed to effect a downhill stop quickly.
Close 5.2, no defects. Repeat, no defects. Total axle 496. Detector out.
As they roll into West Yard, it isn't uncommon to meet with a dock job, in this case holding short on the dock lead with a cut of empties. The yard folks were nice enough to already line the hill train in, so it's a direct shot into track number 1. As the rear end of the hill train clears the way, the dock job's conductor walks over to the turnout control panel and sets their lineup. As with all empty cuts, they'll tuck them back into the yard, building the next train set of cars to head back for the Tilden Mine. Eventually, it all comes together back at the dock. Warboats like the Lee Jugurtha arrive regularly, with each one taking on between 20,000 and 30,000 long tons of ore, requiring over 250 ship loadouts during each shipping season to ship all of Tilden's production. Up on the dock, the last preparations for the ship's arrival involve the spotting of one final loaded cut of ore on track number 4, with the cars carefully lined up above the pockets by a 7 dock job. The Jugurtha is one of the more storied boats on the lakes, originally built to serve as an oiler during the Second World War. She's been modified several times, most recently receiving a new diesel power plant and exhaust gas scrubbers, producing the signature white steam plume seen on many vessels of the Interlake steamship fleet. Precision parking an 826-foot-long ship takes the careful attention of the Jugurtha's crew, but the seasoned crew, of course, makes it look easy. They must secure their ship snugly against the pier and in alignment with the dock chutes without hitting anything, while also coming extremely close to the beach. In fact, the public beachfront extends right to the dock structure here, making this about as close as one can get to a ship loading operation in the Great Lakes. While the ship was coming in, the railroad's dock job finished spotting that loaded cut and have now picked up a cut of empties, seen here as they begin their trip back down the hill to West Yard. With 200 pockets in the dock and each capable of storing several cars of ore each, it can take several shifts to completely fill all of the pockets, a process referred to as charging the dock. Meanwhile, deckhands begin to remove the hatch covers using a specialized lifting hoist. Each of the cover plates weighs several tons and must be carefully set aside to allow access to the empty cargo hold in the ship's belly. When they're ready to load, gravity takes over in almost every respect. The chutes are unlocked and from there gravity takes over, tempered by the cable and counterweight system. The ingenious design of the counterweights ensures that the chutes are balanced all the way down, keeping them from running away as they're lowered. From there, a dockhand uses the brake lever to arrest the descent once the chute is fully lowered into the hole. Then they trigger the pneumatic gate to open, which begins the rapid descent of over 100 tons of ore down into the boat. Following right behind the chute operator is often another dockhand on one of the trapping machines, which are purpose-built to trigger the unloading mechanism on each car. All of the LS&I's car fleet, except the 8500 series, feature Bombay-style dumping doors, which allow a car to be completely emptied in less than 15 seconds. Back in 1912, when the dock opened, the construction was featured in an article on reinforced concrete ore docks in the venerable Engineering News Record publication, which included many photos of construction and diagrams of the design. The 1,200-foot overall length provides for 100 pockets on each side, which are 12 feet wide, half the length of the 24-foot ore cars, which therefore line up with every other pocket. 2 tracks serve each side, allowing for up to 200 cars on the dock at any given time, significantly increasing the overall storage capacity of the dock when needed for larger vessels. When originally constructed, the dock could handle up to 6 ships at once, but today it can only accommodate 2 of the larger modern ships, 1 on each side. Even then, they typically require the additional capacity created by spotting additional cars for direct dumping into the ship's hold, as we've seen here. This is simply because all 100 pockets on each side, fully charged, would not be enough to fill the boat, so there is more added once the pocket gate is open and there's enough space to accept the additional ore without the risk of overflowing. Ultimately, it is this capacity limitation which generally prevents the largest ships on the lakes, the 1,000-footers, from taking on ore here. Those ships have well over double the capacity of these smaller vessels, thus requiring far more than even a fully charged dock plus direct dump cars could provide. Typically, it takes between 6 and 10 hours to fully load an ore boat, and from there most are quick to depart unless they're waiting out weather on the big lake. The ships pull back away from the dock and make a J-turn, getting them pointed out in the right direction, and then set sail for ports such as Sault Ste. Marie, Detroit, and Toledo. Here we see the Ishpeming getting underway, replacing the hatch covers and securing the self-unloading boom. They put their 8,160 horsepower to work, stirring up the bottom as they accelerate towards a cruising speed of around 13.5 knots, typical of the lake freighters. For the LS&I, the departure of another boat means it's another job well done, but always time to start the cycle all over again. As empties are pulled off the dock, they're built back into train sets for the trip up to the mine to return loaded within a couple of days. With an average of 1 ship per day taking on Marquette Range iron ore throughout the shipping season, it is imperative to keep the relay race in motion. Yes, sometimes the manifest enters a lull and the railroad quiets down, and it shuts down with the shipping season completely from mid-January to mid-March. But as long as ore is in demand and being mined near Marquette, it seems that this operation should continue to serve its long-standing and original purpose. Thanks for watching this edition of the Thornapple River Rail series. This was truly a massive project encompassing over 3 years of shooting along with plenty of research. Special thanks to all those who helped in this endeavor. It could not have been done without them. Don't forget to leave a like and subscribe if you liked it, and check out some of my other LS&I videos for more on this incredible railroad.